just a brief discussion about the ABLE Act, which is a piece of legislation which has been the subject of enormous and substantial bipartisan support both here in the Senate and in the House. We know that a lot of families have relied upon and have really benefited from the so-called 529 plans, a section of the IRS code which allows families to save tax-free for education. What we're trying to do with the ABLE Act is to replicate that process, or that opportunity is a better way to say it, so that families that have a loved one with a disability, it may be one disability or it may be more than one, but every family that has a loved one with a disability should have the opportunity to save just like they might for education in a tax-free manner, in a tax-advantaged way. So we've been working on this legislation for a number of years. Senator Richard Burr, the senior senator from North Carolina, and I have led this effort in the Senate. And as I said, it would build upon that 529 model for education. The ABLE Act enjoys the support of 63 United States senators, 63 co-sponsors. In the House, it's up to 335 members of the House. So that's why we mentioned that over 400 members of the Congress agree. And that's why that hashtag, Pass the ABLE Act, ! Is important to highlight. There are few measures that come before the Senate or the House that enjoy that kind of bipartisan support. In the Senate, for example, there's no more than 5 bills that enjoy the support of 63 or more senators. So we're happy about that, but it's not, we're not done yet. We still have a long, long way to go to get this legislation done. So as important as it is to highlight the numbers, it's also important to highlight the people that did the hard work to get us there. I'd like to be able to commend members of the House and the Senate, but the ones who are worthy of even more substantial commendation would be a lot of individuals, some of whom are here in Washington this week. The National Down Syndrome Society. I was just with folks from the National Down Syndrome Society this morning. Over on the House side, they allowed a senator to go across on the House side. The presiding officer knows she served there. Once in a while we get to go over there. They were kind enough to invite us over this morning. They did remarkable work on this legislation and are continuing their advocacy today, even as we speak. And we're grateful for their work. Autism Speaks is another great organization that's done enormous work to bring us to where we are today, and the ARC as well. And so many Americans know a lot about the ARC and the National Down Syndrome Society, as well as Autism Speaks. So we're grateful for that support, but we still have a ways to go. And one of the best ways to ensure that this legislation will get over the goal line, I don't want to use too many football analogies here, but if we're getting close, even if we're in the so-called red zone, we're not in the end zone yet. We've got a ways to go. But one of the best ways to make sure that that happens is to talk about the real people that legislation like this would affect. We mentioned the number of supporters we have. What I didn't mention was the full name of the bill, Achieving a Better Life Experience. That's the acronym ABLE. But I like to think about it in this way as well. I have a constituent, Sarah Wolf, who's with us today, and she knows that the rules don't allow me to indicate where she is today, but she's very close. She's very close by. And she's with us today, and I'm grateful that she's with us because Sarah is a great example of someone who has a disability but is very able, has a disability but on a regular basis, hour after hour, day after day, finds a way to overcome her disability or to manage it as best she can. She's a remarkable speaker. She gives as many speeches in a week as I give, and I'm an elected official. She's well known in northeastern Pennsylvania where we live in the same county. I live in Scranton, she lives in Moscow. She works for the O'Malley and Langen Law Office. She's a law clerk there. But as smart as she is on the law and these issues, probably the most significant part of her whole personality is the dynamism that she brings to issues. She's a dynamic person. She does something that few of us do well, even people that work here as elected officials. She knows how to engage with people. She knows how to deliver a message. She knows how to be candid and direct, but to do it in a way that's engaging and warm and friendly. So I take a lot of, once in a while I'll take instruction from Sarah Wolf, but even more than that, I take inspiration from her. She's someone who is very able and talented and committed, but she's among the many Americans, and Pennsylvanians in my case, asking us to pass this legislation so that if a family like hers wants to begin to save to help pay for a whole range of services for an individual with a disability, that they can do that in a tax-free, or I should say a tax-advantaged environment, and so they can save over time and do it in a manner that doesn't put them at a disadvantage from a tax standpoint down the road. So Sarah is a great example of why the ABLE Act should pass, and she's doing more than her share to make sure that it does pass. So I'm grateful to Sarah Wolf for doing that. Especially grateful to people like Sarah who, like a lot of us at some point in our lives, have to overcome a tragedy. Sarah lost her mother, Connie, not too long ago to a sudden and rapid illness. But she's been able to deal with that tragedy and still help us day in and day out to get the ABLE Act passed. I'll highlight one more story and then I'll conclude. Angie Kane is a 28-year-old who lives in Indianapolis, Indiana. And like Sarah Wolf, she lives with Down syndrome. Angie's had 5 different jobs and works 5 days a week. She works paid positions at Kohl's on Mondays and at the YMCA on Fridays. On Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, she volunteers for several organizations, including a hospital, a Down syndrome office in Indiana, and the Alzheimer's unit of an assisted living facility. Unfortunately, like so many Americans with disabilities, Angie is unable to save enough to cover her future needs. The same problem I just highlighted if we don't change the law with the ABLE Act. Under current law, she must have less than $2,000 in assets in order to be eligible for supplemental security income. That doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's one of the reasons we have to change the law. Angie is therefore forced to limit the amount of money that she earns and work multiple paid and volunteer positions in order to benefit from the steady benefits that SSI provides. Angie would like to live independently and at the same time know that she has limitations in that regard, because without adequate savings and income, because of the current state of the law, she's forced to live with her family. She'd like to be independent, and that's something we all yearn for at some point in our lives. Angie's family is worried about her living and financial situation, especially down the line years from now when her family may not be with her any longer. So stories like Angie Kane's story, the story of Sarah Wolf, and individuals across the country like Sarah and like Angie are the reason we've got to pass the ABLE Act. They don't need a lot of help. They need just a tool, one tool in their toolbox to be able to reach down and be able to have an opportunity to have their families save in a way that will help them down the road. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that 19% of Americans live with one or more disabilities. 12% live with severe disabilities. Many of them are unsure about their ability to cover their basic expenses in the future because they're unable to build adequate savings. You know, we talk a lot about folks that should save. We encourage people to save for college. We encourage families to do that. We encourage people to save for all kinds of things. Just the principle itself, to save and to conserve, is a good one to espouse and to advocate for. But we've got to give, in this instance, families an opportunity to save for a loved one with a disability, or in some cases more than one disability. So whether it's Sarah Wolf or Angie or others, we've got to give them an opportunity to do that, give their families that opportunity. When you see that number of members of Congress, 400 coming together, I believe it's not simply a question of whether this will pass. It's only a question of when the ABLE Act will pass in the next couple of months, we hope, and whether or not we can get every single member of the United States Senate and House to join us in this. It's one major thing we could do this year to show the American people that we get it when it comes to one challenge that a lot of families face.